It was a crisp October morning in the small town of Cloverfield, where the morning fog lingered like a gentle whisper over the golden autumn leaves. Sarah and Mark Dempsey, a young couple in their early 30s, had just settled into their cozy, single-story home with their 6-month-old baby, Ethan. Life was simple yet hectic. Between Mark's long shifts at the factory and Sarah balancing new motherhood, their days were both a blur and a dream. It was on one such morning that a visitor showed up unannounced. Sarah heard a faint scratching sound at the front door just as she was rocking Ethan to sleep. At first, she thought it might be a delivery or a neighbor needing help. But when she opened the door, what she saw made her heart skip a beat. A large German shepherd stood on their porch, its piercing amber eyes locked onto hers with a calm but intense focus. His fur was a rich blend of black and tan, damp from the early morning dew, and he had no collar. He wasn't growling or barking, just standing there, his gaze unwavering. He didn't seem wild or threatening, more like waiting for something. "Whoa," Sarah whispered, clutching Ethan closer to her chest. The baby stirred, but instead of crying, he blinked curiously at the dog. The German shepherd's ears perked up as if he understood that this baby was the most important part of the household. Sarah hesitated for a moment. Should she close the door? Call animal control? Something about the dog made her pause. He looked strong but strangely gentle, almost like he belonged there, like he had come with a purpose. "Mark, there's a dog at the door," she called out as she slowly stepped back into the house. Mark, groggy from his night shift, stumbled out of the bedroom, his dark hair disheveled. "A dog? What kind of dog?" "German shepherd. He's just standing there." Mark came to the door and raised an eyebrow. "Weird. Do you think he's lost?" "He doesn't have a collar," Sarah replied, glancing nervously at the dog. "Probably wandered in from somewhere nearby," Mark said with a shrug. "I'll see if he's friendly." To Sarah's surprise, as soon as Mark stepped out, the dog's entire demeanor shifted. His tail wagged gently, and he sat obediently on the porch. Mark crouched down and extended a hand. "Hey, buddy. What brings you here?" The dog sniffed Mark's hand, then licked it once, a sign of cautious trust. He seemed healthy, well-fed and well-groomed, but there was no indication of where he had come from. No name tag, no chipped ear, nothing. Yet he didn't seem like a stray. "He doesn't seem dangerous," Mark reassured Sarah. "Maybe we should call the shelter, though. Someone might be looking for him." But before they could make any decisions, something unexpected happened. Ethan, cradled in Sarah's arms, reached out and made a small gurgling noise. The German shepherd's head tilted as he watched the baby intently. Slowly, he stood and approached the edge of the porch. Sarah tensed, instinctively holding Ethan tighter. "It's okay," Mark whispered. The dog stopped a few feet away, his eyes never leaving Ethan. He lay down, resting his head on his front paws, his posture completely relaxed and non-threatening. Ethan giggled for the first time in days. He'd been fussy all week, and reached a tiny hand toward the dog. "Wow," Sarah muttered, surprised by her son's reaction. "He likes him." "It's like he knows Ethan," Mark said quietly, awe creeping into his voice. Over the next few minutes, Sarah and Mark observed the dog's behavior. He wasn't just some curious wanderer. He acted as though he were there on a mission, watchful but patient, protective without being overbearing. "I don't know," Sarah admitted, still hesitant. "It's like he's meant to be here or something." "Yeah," Mark agreed, scratching his head. "It's weird, but I feel it too." "What are the odds?" They brought the dog a bowl of water, and he drank without hesitation. Sarah noticed the way his ears twitched, always listening for sounds inside the house. Every time Ethan made a noise, the dog would look up, alert and attentive, but never too close. They decided to give him some time before calling animal control, just to see if anyone in the neighborhood recognized him. That morning, Sarah carried Ethan out to the porch, letting the baby sit on a blanket while she kept an eye on him. The German shepherd lay nearby, occasionally glancing at them but never imposing himself. The moment felt strangely peaceful, as if this new presence had brought a calming balance to their chaotic routine. By mid-afternoon, the dog was still there. He didn't beg for food or attention. He simply stayed. When Sarah brought Ethan in for his nap, the dog lay down by the front door as if standing guard. By evening, word had spread around the neighborhood. No one recognized the dog. The shelter said they'd send someone out the next day to scan him for a microchip. But until then, it seemed the dog was theirs to care for. That night, after Sarah and Mark put Ethan to bed, they found themselves sitting on the living room couch, discussing the day's events. "What if nobody claims him?" Sarah asked, her voice soft with worry and curiosity. Mark leaned back, thoughtful. "I don't know. It's not like we were planning to get a dog. But I don't think this is random. There's something about him." As if on cue, the German Shepherd padded quietly into the room and lay down near Ethan's nursery door. His eyes gleamed in the dim light, ever watchful. He wasn't just a dog. He was a guardian, silent, loyal, and already a part of their lives in ways they hadn't yet understood. Little did they know, the events that would follow would not only test their instincts but change their family forever. The next day began like any other. Ethan woke early, babbling happily in his crib. Sarah felt oddly well-rested, despite having been up several times during the night. It wasn't until she got out of bed that she realized why. Whenever Ethan cried, the dog would quietly move to the nursery door and lay there until the baby calmed down again. It was as if his presence soothed Ethan without Sarah even needing to intervene. Mark chuckled softly as he poured his morning coffee. "Looks like we got ourselves a babysitter," he said, peering at the dog through the kitchen window. Sarah smiled but shook her head. "It's weird, right? Like, how does a dog know to do that?" As the morning went on, they waited for the shelter worker to arrive. In the meantime, the dog continued his watchful behavior. He followed Sarah and Ethan from room to room but always kept a respectful distance. He was calm, patient, and strangely intuitive. It wasn't just his intelligence that struck Sarah. It was his empathy. He seemed to sense when she was anxious and would quietly position himself near her, as if offering silent support. Around noon, a knock on the door signaled the arrival of the shelter worker, a cheerful woman named Laura. She carried a handheld scanner and a clipboard. "You must be the family with the German Shepherd," she said with a warm smile. "That's us," Mark replied, stepping aside to let her in. The dog, who had been lying by the front door, rose to his feet but didn't move. He observed Laura with quiet curiosity, his eyes watchful but not unfriendly. "Hey there, big guy," Laura said softly, crouching down to his level. She moved slowly, allowing him to sniff her hand before gently running the scanner over his back. They all waited in silence, but after a few passes, the scanner beeped without detecting a microchip. "No chip," Laura confirmed, standing up and jotting down notes. "It's possible he was never registered or had his chip removed. He doesn't look like a stray, though. He's in great shape." Sarah sighed, feeling a mix of relief and uncertainty. "So what now?" "Well, if you're interested, you could file a found dog report. We'd post his information and see if anyone claims him. If no one comes forward in a week or two, you'd have the option to adopt him officially." Sarah exchanged a glance with Mark. They hadn't planned on keeping a dog, but after only a day, it already felt like he belonged with them. Still, they needed time to think. "Let's do the report for now," Mark said. "We'll see what happens." After Laura left, the house felt strangely quiet again. Sarah found herself watching the dog more closely. His presence was reassuring, but it also raised so many questions. Where had he come from? Why had he chosen their house? And most importantly, why did he seem so fixated on Ethan? Later that afternoon, those questions grew more pressing. Sarah was folding laundry in the living room while Ethan played on a blanket nearby. The dog lay a few feet away, his eyes half closed. Everything seemed peaceful until a sudden, sharp noise shattered the calm. A loud banging sound from the backyard. Sarah jumped, her heart racing. Before she could react, the dog was on his feet, ears pinned forward and body tense. He darted to the back door, barking in deep, resonant tones that echoed through the house. Sarah froze, her mind racing with fear. Someone was outside. "Mark!" she called out, her voice trembling. Mark hurried in from the garage. "What's going on?" "The dog. He heard something in the yard," Sarah explained, clutching Ethan tightly. Mark grabbed a baseball bat from the hall closet and cautiously opened the back door. The dog bolted outside, barking furiously. Mark followed, scanning the yard for any signs of trouble. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of rustling leaves. Then Mark saw it, a figure in a hoodie sprinting toward the fence at the edge of their property. "Hey!" Mark shouted, but the intruder was already climbing the fence. The dog raced after him, barking and snapping at his heels. The man yelped in fear and scrambled over the fence, disappearing into the trees beyond. The dog stopped at the fence line, growling low in his throat. He stayed there for several moments, watching to make sure the threat was gone, before trotting back to Mark's side. His tail wagged once, as if to say it's safe now. Mark exhaled slowly, lowering the bat. "You're some kind of hero, aren't you?" he murmured, scratching the dog behind the ears. When they returned inside, Sarah hugged Ethan tightly, her eyes wide with shock. "What happened?" she asked. "Someone was in the yard," Mark replied grimly, "probably trying to break in. The dog scared him off." Sarah shuddered. The thought of someone breaking into their home was terrifying, but the idea of what might have happened if the dog hadn't been there was even worse. She looked down at the German Shepherd, who had resumed his position near Ethan's blanket. He lay quietly, as if the whole ordeal hadn't just happened. But his eyes told a different story. He was still on high alert, ready to protect them at a moment's notice. That night, after Ethan was asleep, Sarah and Mark sat together in the living room, their thoughts heavy with everything that had happened. "We can't let him go," Sarah finally said, breaking the silence. "He saved us today. He saved Ethan." Mark nodded slowly. "Yeah, I think he was meant to be here. It's like he knew we needed him before we even knew it ourselves." They decided to give the dog a name, something that reflected his strength and loyalty. After some debate, they settled on Guardian. From that moment on, Guardian became an irreplaceable part of their lives. But the mystery of his arrival was far from over, and the events that followed would challenge their understanding of fate and family in ways they never imagined. Over the next few weeks, Guardian's presence became a natural part of the Dempsey household. The dog's instincts continued to amaze Sarah and Mark. He didn't just watch over Ethan. He seemed to anticipate his needs before anyone else could. When Ethan cried in the middle of the night, Guardian would reach the nursery door before Sarah even stirred. If Ethan fussed during playtime, Guardian would lie close, his steady warmth and calm demeanor soothing the baby. But Guardian wasn't just a protector, he was also a teacher. Ethan began crawling faster than expected, spurred on by his fascination with the dog. He'd giggle and babble incoherent syllables at Guardian, who would respond by gently nudging a toy toward him or letting Ethan tug on his ears. Despite his size and strength, Guardian was always gentle, careful not to hurt the baby. One day, Sarah caught herself smiling as she watched them together. Ethan was crawling toward Guardian, who lay on the living room floor. The dog wagged his tail in encouragement, inching backward playfully to keep Ethan moving. Sarah felt a swell of gratitude and affection. It was almost like having a second parent in the house, a silent, furry guardian angel. "Hey, you two are getting along pretty well, huh?" Sarah said, crouching beside them. Ethan giggled and clapped his hands, while Guardian gave Sarah a look that seemed to say, "Of course. He's my responsibility too." As much as Sarah loved seeing Ethan bond with Guardian, a part of her remained curious and uneasy about the dog's origins. Why had he shown up at their door that day? Was it really just coincidence? Or was there something else at play? That question haunted her again one chilly November afternoon when an unexpected visitor arrived. A man in his mid-40s, dressed in a worn leather jacket, stood on their porch. His face was lined with exhaustion, but his eyes held a mixture of hope and anxiety. "Hi there," he said when Sarah answered the door. "Sorry to bother you, But I heard through the grapevine you've got a German Shepherd that showed up recently. I was wondering if I could see him. Sarah tensed. Are you looking for a missing dog? The man nodded, his expression softening. Yeah. His name's Duke. He went missing about a month ago. He's been with me since he was a pup, trained for search and rescue work. He's special. The words hit Sarah like a punch to the gut. Duke, search and rescue. This man was claiming Guardian as his dog. Her mind raced, conflicted. On one hand, she couldn't imagine parting with Guardian now. He was part of their family. But on the other hand, if this man was telling the truth, didn't Guardian belong with him? Wait here, she said, her voice shaky. I'll get my husband. She found Mark in the garage sorting tools. There's a man at the door. He says Guardian. Well, Duke is his dog. Mark frowned, wiping his hands on a rag. Seriously? After all this time? Yeah. He said Duke's a trained search and rescue dog. What if it's true? Mark sighed and rubbed the back of his neck. Let's hear him out. But I'm not letting anyone take Guardian without proof. They returned to the front door, where the man stood patiently. Guardian padded into the room. His ears perked as he sensed the tension. The moment the man saw the dog, his face lit up with recognition. Duke! He called softly, stepping forward. Guardian froze, his body stiffening. For a long moment he didn't move. Sarah held her breath, unsure of what to expect. Would Guardian rush to his former owner? Would he remember him? But Guardian didn't move. His gaze shifted between the man and Sarah, his eyes searching hers as if asking for direction. Finally, he let out a low whine and stepped back, positioning himself protectively in front of Ethan's playpen. The man's face fell. He doesn't recognize me, he murmured. Or maybe he's bonded with your family now. Mark folded his arms, his tone firm but not unkind. Look, I'm sorry you lost your dog, but Guardian, Duke, whatever his name was, saved my son's life. He's been protecting our family since the day he showed up. I can't just hand him over without knowing for sure. The man nodded slowly, his shoulders slumping. I understand. It's just, I've been looking for him everywhere. He was more than a pet. He was my partner in search and rescue. We saved lives together. But maybe he's found a new purpose here. For a moment, there was a heavy silence. Sarah felt a pang of sympathy. She couldn't imagine how painful it must be to lose a dog like that. But she also knew she couldn't give Guardian up. Not now, not after everything he'd done for them. Maybe there's a way to compromise, she suggested. You could visit him, get to know him again. But it's his choice whether he wants to stay. The man hesitated, then nodded. I'd appreciate that. Thank you. They exchanged contact information, and the man left with a promise to return. Afterward, Sarah sat on the couch, her mind spinning. Guardian lay at her feet, his head resting on her lap. She stroked his fur absently, lost in thought. Looks like you've got two families now, she whispered. But I hope you know, you'll always have a place here. Guardian's tail wagged softly, his eyes closing as if in silent agreement. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. He had chosen them as much as they had chosen him. And for now that was enough. A week later, the man, whose name was Tom Grayson, returned as promised. This time he brought photos of Duke from when he was a puppy, along with documents proving his involvement in search and rescue operations. In the photos, Duke looked remarkably similar to Guardian, same amber eyes, same intelligent expression. But Sarah noticed something else. The dog in the photos, while clearly well cared for, didn't have the same calm serenity that Guardian did now. He's changed, Tom admitted as he sat in the living room. He used to be more intense, always on high alert. But now he seems more at peace. Mark nodded, glancing at Guardian, who lay at Sarah's feet. Ethan was nearby, happily stacking blocks with his chubby little hands. Every so often, Guardian would glance over at the baby, as if making sure all was well. It's like he found what he was missing, Sarah said softly. A sense of home. Tom sighed, rubbing his temples. I get that. It's hard to explain, but dogs like Duke, Guardian, they have this instinct to protect and serve. If he feels like his job is here with you and your family, maybe that's where he's meant to be now. They decided to take things slow. Tom visited twice more that week, spending time with Guardian to see if the dog would remember their bond. Though Guardian was polite and responsive, he didn't show the emotional attachment Tom had hoped for. Each time Tom left, Guardian would return to Ethan's side as if reaffirming his place in the family. Then, one night, everything changed. It was a bitterly cold evening. The temperature had dropped below freezing, and the wind howled through the trees outside. Sarah and Mark were in the middle of a movie night when Guardian suddenly perked up. His ears stood straight, and he let out a sharp bark. "What is it, boy?" Mark asked, pausing the movie. Guardian barked again, pacing near the front door. He was clearly agitated, his body tense and alert. Sarah's heart began to race. "You think someone's outside?" she whispered. Mark grabbed his jacket and flashlight. "I'll check it out. Stay here with Ethan." Guardian followed him to the door, barking again as if urging him to hurry. Sarah watched nervously from the window as Mark stepped onto the porch and scanned the yard. First, everything seemed normal. But then Mark noticed something. A figure slumped near the edge of their driveway. "Sarah, call 911, he shouted. Sarah grabbed the phone, her hands shaking as she dialed. Meanwhile, Mark and Guardian rushed toward the figure. It was Tom. He was lying on the ground, shivering violently, his face pale and lips blue. "Tom, what happened?" Mark yelled, kneeling beside him. "Got lost," Tom gasped through chattering teeth. "Car broke down. Tried to walk. So cold." Guardian immediately lay next to Tom, pressing his warm body against him to provide heat. Mark shrugged off his jacket and draped it over Tom's shoulders. "Hang in there. Help's on the way." Within minutes, the paramedics arrived and took Tom to the hospital. The doctors later told them he was suffering from hypothermia and could have died if he hadn't been found in time. The next day, Sarah and Mark visited Tom in the hospital. He looked better, though still weak. His eyes filled with gratitude as he saw Guardian enter the room. "You saved me," Tom said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "Both of you. If Guardian hadn't sensed I was in trouble, I don't even want to think about what would have happened." Sarah smiled, kneeling beside the bed and stroking Guardian's head. He knew. He always knows. Tom reached out and gently patted Guardian's back. "I think I finally understand. He's where he's supposed to be. He chose you, and I won't stand in the way of that." The words hit Sarah like a wave of relief. Tears welled in her eyes as she nodded. "Thank you, Tom. That means more than you know." After that, Tom formally transferred ownership of Guardian to the Dempseys. It wasn't an easy decision for him, but he knew it was the right one. In return, Sarah and Mark promised that Tom would always be welcome to visit and stay a part of Guardian's life. That night, as the family sat together in the living room, the atmosphere felt lighter than it had in weeks. Ethan played contentedly on the floor while Guardian lay nearby, his eyes half closed in peaceful contentment. Sarah leaned her head on Mark's shoulder, a deep sense of gratitude settling over her. "I can't believe how much has changed since he showed up," she murmured. "It's like he was sent to us for a reason." "Maybe he was," Mark replied. "Guardian's more than just a dog. He's family. He's exactly what we needed." As if he understood, Guardian opened his eyes and wagged his tail lazily. He let out a soft huff of contentment, as if to say, "I'm exactly where I belong." But fate wasn't quite done testing them yet. In the coming days, another unexpected event would force them to lean on Guardian's instincts and loyalty once again. For now, though, they were content to bask in the warmth of their hard-earned peace. Life finally settled into a calm, comforting rhythm. Guardian had fully integrated into the Dempsey household. Neighbors admired him, and children in the area loved waving to him whenever they saw him walking with Sarah and Ethan. The once mysterious dog had become a beloved figure in the community. But the peace wouldn't last for long. It was a Thursday afternoon, cold and cloudy. Sarah had taken Ethan to the park, a short walk from their house. Guardian walked beside the stroller, his posture relaxed but alert as always. The park was empty except for a few families scattered across the playground. Sarah decided to take a seat on a bench near the swings, letting Ethan out of the stroller to crawl around on the soft grass. Ethan squealed happily, waving his arms as he crawled after a leaf that had blown near him. Guardian lay a few feet away, watching closely. Sarah smiled, feeling at ease for the first time in a long while. The gentle breeze and the rustling of trees were soothing, almost lulling her into a state of relaxation. But the peaceful moment shattered in an instant. A loud screech of tires pierced the air. Sarah's head snapped up as she saw a black SUV speed into the park's parking lot. The vehicle jerked to a stop near the playground, and two men stepped out. They looked out of place. One wore a hood pulled low over his face, and the other had a nervous, shifty demeanor. Something about them immediately set Sarah on edge. Guardian sensed it too. He rose to his feet, his ears standing at full attention. A low growl rumbled from his throat as he positioned himself between Ethan and the approaching men. "Guardian," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. The men began walking in their direction, their eyes locked on Sarah and Ethan. One of them smiled, but it wasn't friendly. "Nice dog," he said casually, though there was a cold edge to his voice. Sarah's instincts screamed at her to grab Ethan and run, but her legs felt frozen. Guardian's growl deepened, his body tense and ready to spring. He stood his ground, daring the men to come any closer. The man with the hood stopped a few yards away. "Relax, lady. We're not here to cause trouble," he said, though his tone suggested otherwise. He glanced at Ethan, who was now sitting quietly, sensing the tension in the air. "Cute kid." Sarah's blood ran cold. "Leave us alone," she said firmly, her voice stronger than she felt. "Easy," the man replied, raising his hands as if in surrender. "We were just—" Before he could finish, Guardian lunged forward with a powerful bark, baring his teeth. The men jumped back in alarm. The sheer size and force of the dog seemed to shatter whatever confidence they had. Guardian didn't attack, but he stood his ground, barking furiously and snapping his jaws in warning. "Whoa! Okay, okay," the man yelled, stumbling backward. "Let's get out of here." The two men hurried back to their SUV, slamming the doors shut. The vehicle peeled out of the parking lot, disappearing down the road. Guardian stood motionless for a moment, his eyes fixed on the retreating car, before finally relaxing. His growls subsided, but his ears remained perked as he scanned the area for any further threats. Sarah's legs gave out, and she sank to her knees, pulling Ethan into her arms. Her hands shook as she stroked Guardian's head. "Good boy. You saved us again," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. A few minutes later, a police officer arrived after Sarah made a panicked call. She described the men and their vehicle, and the officer promised to increase patrols in the area. Though the men were gone, the fear lingered. That evening, after Ethan was safely tucked in bed, Sarah and Mark sat together, reflecting on what had happened. Guardian lay at their feet, ever watchful. "I don't even want to think about what could have happened if Guardian wasn't there," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. Mark squeezed her hand. "He was meant to be here. I've never believed in fate, but this feels different, like something brought him to us for a reason." Sarah nodded, tears filling her eyes again. "He's more than just a protector. He's part of the family. I don't care where he came from or who he was before. Guardian is ours now." Mark smiled softly. "Yeah, and I think he knows that." Guardian lifted his head at the sound of his name, his tail wagging slightly. He got up and walked over to Sarah, resting his head on her lap. She stroked his ears gently, feeling a deep sense of gratitude and love. In the following days, Sarah and Mark took extra precautions to keep their family safe. They installed new security cameras, and Mark began locking up tighter than ever before. Guardian's role as protector became even more valued, and neighbors took notice of how loyal and alert he was. But for Sarah, it was more than just safety. Guardian had given her something she hadn't realized she'd been missing: peace of mind. Despite the chaos and fear that life sometimes brought, she knew that as long as Guardian was there, her family would always be protected. Reflecting on everything that had happened since Guardian's arrival, Sarah realized that sometimes, life brings you exactly what you need when you least expect it. Guardian had entered their lives at a moment when they didn't even know they needed him, and he had proven time and time again that his purpose was to protect and love them. To anyone facing fear or uncertainty, Sarah would offer this advice. Trust your instincts, but also trust the unexpected. Sometimes, the greatest blessings come from places you can't explain. And sometimes, those blessings have 4 legs, a wagging tail, and a heart full of loyalty. Guardian was living proof of that. He wasn't just a dog. He was a guardian, a protector, and above all, family.